Flesh. 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 Served Divinity of Earth. John Jones of Mars. Arthur Curry of Earth. Ralph Dibney of Earth. Jane Loring of Earth. Ronnie Raymond of Earth. Digger Harkness of Earth. Rise.
It was the Blackest night. A being called Necron sought to invade this universe and extinguish all life within. At the behest of his minions, the Black Lantern Corps was forged. An army was created overnight of malevolent undead lanterns who would seek out the life they had a connection to and brutally slaughter it. In desperation, a being called Ganthet created a copy of every other ring across the emotional spectrum. The Indigo ring, which relied on the power of compassion, scanned the planet Earth for a suitable host to serve with during this crisis. By this point, the Earth was filled with many powerful and benevolent superheroes, yet one man stood out among the rest. Ray Palmer of Earth, you have the ability to feel great compassion. Welcome to the Indigo Tribe. Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and thank you for checking out my origins and bio for Ray Palmer, New Earth. So, in our journey through the various corps of the Green Lanterns and my favorite member of each, my choice is for Ray Palmer for the Realm of Compassion. My reasoning for this is fairly straightforward. I was not too interested in picking Indigo 1, though she was my initial choice, because though I find her background as this forcibly reformed character, which is the background of all Indigo Tribe members, to be a compelling one, it gets a little repetitive, especially when it once again would have been a character shuffling from one major green event to the next, and we didn't need to see another character like that after doing 3 or 4 of them as part of this series already. So I went with a character who's a little different than that. I went with Ray Palmer, a more traditional Earth superhero who was only a compassion lantern for a very limited period of time. We actually had a lot of potential choices for this throughout my run of favorite Green Lantern characters, but up until now I've resisted choosing a character like Barry Allen or Lex Luthor, mostly because we've done bios on them before for one thing, but also because they've only ever been these lanterns for very short periods of time during Blackest night. But for Ray Palmer, I found that decision to make him a Indigo Lantern a compelling one to begin with, and it fits in with what I like about this character. What's really cool about Ray Palmer, and what I'll ask you to sort of pay attention to as we're going through this video, is the fact that he cares too much, and that is a overused to a degree superhero trait in a sense. Batman really makes a lot of hay out of this, but a lot of other kind of tragic superheroes do that as well. But it doesn't really work in the traditional model. So for example, Batman never properly sleeps and is constantly overworking himself, but very rarely in any Batman story does that sort of thing ever actually come to a cost in terms of what his character values and what's important to him. Batman very rarely loses a life because of his irresponsible behavior when it comes to self-care, nor does he ever suffer from professional consequences, except for in the rare moments when he does. But Ray Palmer genuinely cares too much, and it has cost him dearly. As we'll discuss in this video, Ray on more than one occasion essentially loses everything because he cares so much and is so gung-ho about protecting people. It costs him something to be a superhero. It costs him dearly, and I find that a compelling aspect of his character that probably, more than anything else, informs nicely why he ended up part of the Indigo Tribe for a brief period. Because there's a difference between caring and caring to the extent that you have to give something up yourself, and that makes Ray Palmer one of the most heroic superheroes, but also one of the most superhero of superheroes. The one that actually is willing to go the line and lose something in the name of saving others. And that says something. It makes him a very interesting character. He only really started to get any degree of popularity after his divorce with Jean Loring, once they started making him a more traditional superhero, once he went off to become a little Puttian-style adventurer in the Sword of the Atom miniseries, well, that's when his character starts to truly get compelling. And then we get into a much more messier side of things as Ray Palmer enters the modern era. I have mixed feelings about all of that, but I will say, though parts of Identity Crisis and Countdown are rough, once we get into Blackest Night, a lot of that does ultimately pay off in a way, so it's not the worst thing in the world, I suppose, but I still really don't care for Identity Crisis and Countdown. I've made that statement before, but both of those stories don't come across great even here when we're just focusing on one narrow aspect of those storylines and how they pertain to one character. Now, before we take off and get into the entire life history of Ray Palmer, and you'll forgive me for taking a little bit of time, I have a lot of things to say about this guy. He's appeared in over 800 comics, so there's a lot to this character. But if you want to check out other videos about other characters, including my favorite Green Lantern characters from each of the Emotional Spectrum Corps, then you should subscribe to our channel, and you can do so by hitting that button down below. We also have a Patreon page in that video description, and you should check that out too. Raymond Palmer was a scientist working at the prestigious Ivy University, located in Ivytown, Connecticut, where the young man grew up. One day, he discovered a meteor containing the remnants of a white dwarf star with his colleague, Professor Hyatt. Ray discovered the ultraviolet light from the star remnants, which, focused through a special lens, resulted in objects shrinking down in size. However, upon shrinking down, the objects would always explode. One day, he was trapped in a cave with his girlfriend, Jean Loring, and a group of hikers. In order to escape, Ray was forced to use his beam on himself, learning that some special property in his own biology prevented him from exploding. After leading the group to safety, Ray elected at first to hide his new powers from the public, and even Jean, while she focused on starting a career in law. Palmer thus created a new identity as the superhero The Atom, and a special belt that allowed him to shrink down at will. He began to fight crime mostly in Ivytown, learning a number of techniques that made him an effective crime fighter. These include his trademark ability to shrink down so small that he could travel along the electrical impulses in a phone landline, or, late into his career, even shrink down beyond the subatomic level, so small that Ray could slip in between the cracks in reality, journeying through them freely. By retaining his proportional strength at a smaller size, the Atom became a dangerous and effective opponent in combat. Over time, during his career as a superhero, he would learn to shrink down others as well. But this ability always came with the risk of these other people exploding, so they could only be shrunk down this way for short periods of time. Ray quickly became a popular hero in the local community. He befriended Ivy's local law enforcement and even made contacts within the CIA, who would send him on espionage missions abroad. Being a superhero, the Atom quickly found himself in conflict with villains, including the Floronic Man and the time-obsessed thief known as Kronos. The Atom would also go on time travel adventures thanks to Professor Hyatt's device called the Time Pool, and he would also occasionally battle against alien threats. He even teamed up with an older version of the Atom from Earth 2 in a chance encounter. Ray later found himself in the middle of a scheme to take down a team of superheroes called the Justice League of America. The Atom worked to expose this plan, concocted by a man named Amos Fortune and other villains. In the process, he worked with and even saved the Justice League. Due to his heroism and dedication, the Atom was made a member of this group. Working alone and with the JLA, the Atom faced many villains and threats, while Ray continued his career as a scientist. He also discovered an entire world that existed on a microscopic scale with the rest of the Justice League. This would mark an early occasion of Palmer exploring worlds that exist on a scale so small that they are beyond our perception or understanding. Ray would journey into many such worlds to learn about them throughout his career and life as a superhero. He continued dating Jean, but failed on numerous occasions to successfully propose to her. Eventually, she started to relent when she noticed Ray became increasingly embroiled in his own work, not realizing this was a byproduct of his new double life as a superhero. Jean finally accepted after she briefly thought she lost him in a car accident. At some point, Ray encountered an intelligent bird named Major Mina that could mimic human speech. Palmer adopted Major as a pet and a sidekick for a short time, with Ray able to shrink down and ride the bird for easy transportation as the Atom. It is unknown what exactly happened to Mina, but after a while, Ray stopped working with him for whatever reason after one particular mission with the FBI. Palmer also found himself working more and more at the side of a man who had come to be his closest superhero partner, Hawkman. Jean was later kidnapped by a microscopic world that believed her to be the descendant of their ruler. Hawkman and the Atom were able to rescue her, but not before these people exposed Jean to so much of their specific radiation that she went insane. She was restored to normal after this thanks to an encounter with a strange being called the Justmaster. The Justice League, Atom, and Hawkman defeated this being, and Jean was finally saved. After many adventures, including a near-death experience with the villainous T.O. Morrow, and a journey to Mars with the Justice League member, the Martian Manhunter, the wedding with Jean finally came about. The night before the wedding, Ray finally revealed his dual identity as the Atom to her. Though Jean had long come to admire the Atom as a superhero and considered him a close friend, even wanting the hero to be Ray's best man at the wedding, she was deeply hurt by the long-held lie and nearly broke the wedding off. Nevertheless, at a ceremony attended by a number of their closest friends and peers, including the Justice League, Hawkman, and Professor Hyatt, Jean forgave Ray, and they were wed. After this, Ray started to take on a more supportive role over time with the Justice League, generally only called upon when his unique powers were needed. Over time, however, Ray's relentless pursuit of science and superheroism, coupled with Jean focusing on her own legal practice, caused tremendous strain on their marriage. When Jean began an affair with a fellow lawyer named Paul Hoban, and Ray discovered this, he abruptly took off to South America to investigate some white dwarf star radiation he detected there. During a flight on his way there, Ray discovered a cocaine operation and was attacked by his pilots, who were part of the involved drug gang. Ray escaped the plane and shrunk himself down to survive, but he was hit by lightning, causing him to be stuck at just 6 inches tall, while thanks to a plane crashing, he was thought dead by the rest of the world. Jean, struck by this loss, did eventually move on, marrying Paul and starting a new life with her husband. As for the Atom, he was captured by aliens called the Catarthans, tiny beings abandoned on Earth long ago. Ray learned these people's language and their ways, fighting his way through various challenges, and eventually securing himself a position of leadership among a specific tribe of the Catarthans, called the Moraladians. In a battle against corrupt Catarthan rulers named Kalich and Duragus, Ray emerged victorious, and saved the rest of this tiny society, but was returned to his normal human size in the process. Palmer passed out from the experience and was saved by human rescuers. Waking up in a hospital, Palmer realized he had no interest in returning to his old life. Jean had moved on, and he was ready to do the same. He officially divorced her and returned to Ivytown to settle his affairs before seeking out the Catarthans with his friend Norm, revealing everything about his time as the Atom to this man in the process. He said goodbye to Norm, shrunk down, and chose to live with the Catarthans, with no intention of returning back to his life with the human race. Instead, he focused on a Moraladian princess named Lathwin, who he had fallen in love with through the course of his adventure with this tribe. Ray lived with his new people as they began to rebuild a new, more developed society under his leadership. It was some time later that he was sought out by Paul Hoban, who revealed that Jean had accidentally shrunk herself down when they were cleaning out Ray's old lab. Palmer managed to save his ex-wife and return her to normal size before wishing the couple farewell and leaving them with his old size-changing belt. Things changed during an event called the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Due to an attack by a powerful being called the Anti-Monitor, the Atom was one of many heroes called into action to not just protect Earth, but all of reality. In the end, this powerful being was defeated, but the nature of the universe and the history of the world around Ray Palmer was fundamentally altered. Unlike many other superheroes, though, much of the history and details of Ray Palmer's life remained intact. However, as for the other superheroes, they all experienced extensive changes, particularly Hawkmen and prominent members of the Justice League, meaning much of the Atom's history with these heroes was changed or erased entirely, especially Batman, Superman, and definitely Wonder Woman, who was rewritten to have not been a founding member of the Justice League at all. As for Hawkman, his real name and identity was changed from Kadar Hol to Carter Hall. Yet the long history and friendship between these two heroes was preserved. The exact nature and details of these changes as they pertain to the life history of Ray Palmer following the Crisis is still not fully understood to this day. In the time following the Crisis, Ray was still living with the Catarthans until the people were abruptly wiped out in a tragic fire. Ray returned to Ivytown only to find his old life was gone. Jean was long out of the picture, and his career was over. His identity as a superhero was publicly exposed by Norm, who published a book about his and Jean's life experiences, under the assumption that Ray was never going to return. After a slow start trying to resume his life as a superhero, Ray learned that the Catarthans were killed by a faction of the CIA in order to secure the return of the Atom as a useful asset. In revenge, he had the government agents shrunk down to 6 inches permanently, using Catarthan technology. He returned to Ivytown only to say goodbye to his friends he still had there, including Professor Hyatt and Norm, before he went into hiding, posing as a simple teacher in the hopes he would be left alone for good under a new identity. The miniaturized agents swore revenge against Ray, and one member died during an attempt to kill Dr. Palmer. In response, Ray sought out an important government figure named Amanda Waller, who convinced him to fake his death by working with a man named Adam Clay on Amanda's Black Ops organization called the Suicide Squad. Ray took on a false identity called the Stinger, and successfully drew out Black Snake, another person responsible for the genocide of the Catarthans. This victory came at a cost though, as Adam Clay died while posing as the Atom. Gradually, Ray began to rebuild his life as a superhero, and rejoined the Justice League, once again participating on occasional missions like he used to long ago. During an event called 0 Hour, Ray Palmer was artificially de-aged into the body of a teenager. He became a member of the Teen Titans after this for a time, though he initially viewed that as a step down from his time as a Justice League member. There were some benefits though, as Ray gained the ability to grow in size to the extent he could become a giant. Eventually he was reverted back to normal thanks to a hero called the Wave Rider, though it required the sacrifice of Ray's new ability to grow beyond his normal human size. Over time, Ray began to feel a renewed sense of purpose, and like he had managed to cobble his life back together after all of his experiences with the Catarthans. He secured membership with the Justice League once again, and even managed to reconcile with Jean Loring. They were able to start a friendship with one another, and she even agreed to hand over some of Ray's old patents that she had won in the divorce. However, this was all actually part of an insane plan on her part to try and win him back over. Jean's mental health experienced a massive decline. She devised a plan to use Ray's technology to drive him back into a relationship with her by murdering a woman named Sue Dibney after parts of her plan went wrong, taking advantage of a decision made years ago by the Justice League, with Ray Palmer included, to mentally alter a villain named Dr. Light who had raped Sue. Jean nearly used this information to fracture the entire superhero community by revealing what had happened. She devised a number of schemes to cover her tracks, but it was eventually found out when Dr. Midnight performed an autopsy in Sue's corpse. But Ray managed to get the confession out of her when he figured this out on his own anyways, and she was sent to Arkham Asylum, but the damage by then was long done. Palmer, overwhelmed by grief and shock, abandoned the Justice League and disappeared completely, shrinking down smaller than he had ever shrunk before. In his absence, individuals such as Ryan Choi and Booster Gold would use his technology for the betterment of mankind, while Ray secretly took refuge in a realm called the Nanoverse. There, he learned that the Multiverse had returned to existence after its destruction during the Crisis of Infinite Earths. Ray began to use his powers to travel the newly reformed Multiverse, until he found a utopian Earth 51. He met his counterpart on this world only to witness that man die. Ray chose to replace his counterpart, marrying this world's Jean Loring and taking his place as a well-regarded scientist consulting for the Justice League. Here Ray discovered the alternate version of himself had taken an interest in microbiology. His counterpart was immune to all diseases and viruses, and stopped a sentient virus named Mortococcus from destroying this utopia. Palmer realized this virus, arguably the deadliest in the multiverse, and deliberately created by some dark being, could take root in other realities, and set out to inoculate every Earth in the multiverse. Dr. Palmer was eventually discovered by a number of travelers from his home world, leading to the deaths of Jean and a number of his friends on Earth 51. In spite of yet another heavy loss, Ray worked with these heroes from his original home in an attempt to destroy the virus, though ultimately, an entire universe was lost thanks to this infection, an altered version of Palmer's former home of Earth 51. Ray returned to his original Earth, and in spite of going through a great deal of grief because of all of this, took up a role with a new team specifically dedicated to monitoring the Monitors, celestial beings that overlook the multiverse itself, and who were responsible for the death of the alternate version of Jean and many others. It was around the same time as these events that Jean Loring of the original Earth was also killed. Having been possessed by a dangerous entity called Eclipso for some time, she drowned when the villainous being abandoned her. By then, enough heroes had forgiven her and come to understand what happened to her that they gave her a burial as if she were any other superhero, a move that did not sit well with certain members of the hero community. Ray would return to his Earth on a couple of occasions while working throughout the multiverse to protect it. First to help Ryan Choi after his successor was tricked by Palmer's old enemy, Kronos, and then again against the mighty Darkseid during the final crisis. On the second visit, it seems he elected to stay back on Earth permanently. Sometime later, Ray reached out to his old friend Hawkman and asked him to visit Jean's grave. Carter refused, unwilling to forgive Jean for her many crimes. It was then that the Blackest Night began, and Carter was brutally killed and turned into a Black Lantern, a living avatar of death itself. He called Ray back in an attempt to lure his former friend to his unsuspecting death. Ray was nearly killed by the now undead Hawkman and Hawkgirl, only surviving by shrinking himself down and entering the now revived Jean Loring's new Black Lantern ring with a hero named Mera. They learned the Black Rings were nothing like the Green Lantern rings, instead made of dark matter and actively sending energy to some strange being that turned out to be the mastermind behind the Black Lanterns called Nekron. Worse still, the surviving essence of Jean within the ring warned the two that every one of the risen Black Lanterns were heading straight towards Earth. Ray and Mera left the ring to warn the still living heroes, but they were nearly overwhelmed by the massive numbers and power of the Black Lanterns. They were saved by other lanterns from the rest of the emotional spectrum, and Ray was then deputized into becoming a member of the Indigo tribe. The leader of the tribe, Indigo 1, explained the nature of their powers and Ray's new ability to harness the entire emotional spectrum through the special abilities of the Indigo rings. By using their compassion to tap into the emotions of others, Ray could now effectively operate as a lantern from any of the core of light. Indigo 1 also explained that she could teleport the entire emotional spectrum's lantern core to Earth in order to defeat Nekron, but would need time to meditate. Ray thus came to her defense, fighting off the Black Lanterns by using the powers of the red, orange, and green light. The Atom even traveled to Indigo 1's ring to purge it of a Black Lantern infection during this event, where he was confronted by undead versions of the Mordladians, as well as Jean Loring, and was forced to destroy them all. Indigo 1 was able to summon the armies, but Ray asked that she keep his key role in this victory a secret, only wanting to work together with her to find a way to truly resurrect Hawkman and Hawkgirl after all of this was over. Palmer fought on the front lines of the final battle against Nekron and witnessed his dark being's defeat at the hands of the newly forged White Lantern Corps. Ray was elated to discover that Hawkman, Hawkgirl, and a number of other friends were resurrected as a result of Nekron's fall. With Palmer once again firmly established on Earth, he began to redevelop routes, connecting with friends like Professor Hyatt as well as Ray's father and brother. Palmer later discovered that his successor Ryan Choi was murdered by Deathstroke, and managed to track the villain down and seriously injure him in revenge. He and the Justice League were unable to take the villain into custody, however, as it would have led to severe political consequences and many deaths. Ray did take comfort in delivering a touching eulogy at Ryan Choi's funeral. Years later, an iteration of this version of Ray would go on to get revenge against Deathstroke during the Convergence event, in a domed version of Gotham City. He also encountered another version of Ryan Choi when the domes came down during this event, and battled to save his iteration of Gotham. As a result, he became viewed as the hero of this version of Gotham City.